Hi, I'm Pat Cohen, Superintendent of Schools here at Burlington Community Schools. 9/11 for me, that morning I was in a classroom teaching. It came across the news, and what it meant to me right away with my training in the Army, I knew that I would end up gone and be away from my family for a long extended period of time. But the thing that really touched me the most was watching the people, the buildings burn, and knowing that there were people dying inside, and watching the people jump off the building and those type of things, and that a foreign country had been able to project the force on the United States and the damage that they had, and then the ramifications that would follow. I knew our lives would never be the same again, and I knew that they'd be radically different quickly, and that came to be true.
When I first found out about what was going on in New York on 9/11, I was at Burlington High School, and in fact my day started off, I had first period planning, and I went downstairs to the office to get a cup of coffee, and I saw on the TVs on there that one of the buildings was smoking. And you know, my first thought was the movie The Towering Inferno. So I went back upstairs, I asked somebody in the office, I asked them what happened. They said, well, they thought a plane hit a building. I didn't really think anything, so I went upstairs. I was in room 207 at the high school. It's a great big room. Turned on the projector and put CNN up on the screen and was watching, and just like everybody else, they didn't really quite knew all what was going on, and I was watching the feed live, and all of a sudden there's another airplane that came flying in and hit the building, the second tower. And I think everyone who actually be watching at the time knew then this was not an accident, that this is really was almost an act of war, an act of terrorism. And the whole day was sort of surreal. I just remember watching it all day in my class, and I remember, one of the things that we talked about, I said, I feel sorry for this generation, these young people, because they're going to live in a world that's different from ours. And unfortunately, we're always living under the shadow of now terrorism, where it can strike anywhere. So it definitely changed. I mean, I guess when I think about 9/11, I understand how people must have felt then on December 7th, 1941, when they found out about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and we've been living in the wake of this ever since. So, that's sort of how my day sort of took place. Sort of at the end of the day, though, I remember I was going to meet my wife at Wendy's, and it was Monday, and we were going to meet, and I was waiting for her, and I had the radio on, and they said that Air Force One will be flying back to Washington, D.C., so if you go outside and look up, you'll be able to see it. So I looked up, and sure enough, there was Air Force One flying by over Burlington, and you could see the two F-16 fighter jets on each one of its wings as President Bush was heading back to D.C. So it was definitely one of those kind of days that you will never forget, where you're at, what you were doing on 9/11 then in 2001.
On September 10th is actually my daughter's birthday. I had been in Colorado on an elk hunt for the previous 2 weeks. Came back on the 10th to surprise her. We had done some stuff on the 10th, and I was actually on days off still recovering from my elk hunt. Got up in the morning on the 11th and flipped on the news like I normally did, and seen the tragedies that occurred in New York. The one thing that I remember the most about it is how helpless I felt, how surreal it was. I was also coaching football at Oak Street, and I remember we had practice on the 11th, and it was so quiet. I mean, there was nothing going on. It was a very surreal time.
On 9/11, I was in 7th grade. When everything started happening, none of us really knew what was going on. The teachers were really quiet. They were trying to shelter us, so I was really confused. And then our social studies teacher was playing the news, and we kind of got a glimpse of the towers and just the different smoke. And I remember people falling out or jumping out of the window to get away from the flames. I didn't really get it until I got home, and my mom kind of explained to me what was going on and all the people that were dying. And once you watch the news and just seeing people bawling because so many of them had lost family and were the whole world was pretty much devastated by the terrorist attack.
Hi, my name is Mrs. White. I remember 9/11. I was teaching over at Washington Elementary School. I was down in the office for something, and the office had the TV on because the first plane had hit the first tower. So I was standing there watching, and at that time they didn't know if it was an accident or an act of terrorism. And while we were watching the TV, the second plane came, I saw, and hit the second tower. And at that time, we kind of knew it was an act of terrorism, and it was really scary to think about that some other country was purposely killing all these people on the planes and in the buildings, and you saw people screaming, and people were jumping out of the buildings, and I actually saw the towers collapse to the ground. And it just really hit home as far as this is our country, and there's people here that are terrorizing us, and we didn't know who it was at first and why they were doing what they did. And then the news kept playing as far as you heard later on another plane had hit the Pentagon, and another plane had gone down in Pennsylvania. And then I remember all the airplanes were grounded for quite some time, for several days, I think. And it was just something that went on for days and weeks and months as far as they were trying to figure out why and who, and it was pretty sobering experience. I was just glad I didn't know anybody in New York City at the time, but all the families were just, you felt for all those families that were losing people or didn't know what the outcome was.
I was in 6th grade at L&M, a little north of here, and very scared, very nervous. The only good thing about that day is I got to see Air Force One fly over. So
Hello, I'm Mrs. Craig, and the day that I found out about 9/11, I was at North Hill Elementary School, substitute teaching for a 3rd grade classroom, and a couple of the kids had come in and said something serious had happened, that a plane had flown into a building. So during recess, all the teachers gathered in another teacher's room, and we were watching the TV and watching the events that were taking place and unfolding. So that's where I was on 9/11, and that's a day I'm not ever going to forget.
So when 9/11 happened, I remember it just like it was yesterday. I was a sophomore in high school, and I was sitting in my Spanish 2 class, and we were taking a quiz. And I'll never forget when our principal got on the intercom and told all the teachers to turn on the TVs in our room, and we sat there all day long and we just watched all the coverage and we watched it happen. And we were taking a quiz in Spanish, and I remember looking up from finishing the quiz, and the TV was on, and I looked up and the first building was like falling, and it was the craziest thing. It was kind of terrifying because we really didn't know what was going to happen. And it's something that I was a
sophomore in high school. I was in band that morning for marching band, and the kid that was always late, he showed up late again. The band instructor started getting on him, harping on him, and he said he was watching the news because someone hit the towers in New York, and she didn't believe him, so he ran over to the TV, turned it on while she was yelling at him, and we saw the first tower burning. And we all stopped playing that day, and we sat around the TV the rest of the day in all of our classes watching, and I still remember watching the second plane hit the tower, and it just terrified me. My parents called me later after school that day and said, meet me at the gas station, we're going to fill up all of our cars, and we had gas tanks too that we filled up because we were so scared as to what that would be doing to the future gas prices and everything. So it was just terrifying. The day was silent, everybody was serious, and it was something that I honestly will never forget.
Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning, The September Morn by Alan Jackson. And he wrote this song based from the events that took place on September 11th, 2001. So where was I? I was a senior at Western Illinois University. My roommate and I had just woken up in the morning, and my roommate always turned on 2 channels, either CNN or MTV. And that morning, for whatever reason, my roommate Brittany turned on CNN, and we didn't see the first tower get hit, but we did see the second tower. And I remember just sitting there in our room and sitting on the bed, and we were just in complete shock. We thought like this was a huge prank. We couldn't understand what was happening. We didn't even understand the whole idea that another country would be doing something like this to us. And we just sat there with our jaws dropped down to the floor. we debated. Do we go to class? Do we stay here? What are we supposed to do? We don't understand what's going on. At the time, I was a broadcasting major. And so I was expecting to go to my broadcasting classes where we talked about the news and current events and journalism and writing. And I remember sitting in my class that morning and we weren't watching any of the news. We weren't watching anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, how ironic is this that I'm a broadcasting major and we're not even looking and talking about what's happening to our country right now. And within a half hour of sitting in class, the dean of the university called all the teachers and canceled all the classes for the day and pretty much put the university on a lockdown. And we were all told we had to go home. We had to go back to our dorms, our apartments, wherever it was that we were living, if it was on campus or off campus, but we had to go home. It was that serious. And I remember going back to my house with all of my other roommates, and we just sat in a room and watched TV all day. I remember calling my parents and crying because I was so scared. I didn't understand what was happening because for my generation, we had experienced nothing like this ever. My parents, they grew up in an era where they lived through the Vietnam War. They lived through Martin Luther King Jr. Being assassinated. They lived through the Civil Rights Movement. One of the richest parts of history my parents lived through. So they've been through things like this. And I really had to call them and lean on them for help in understanding why a country that, in my mind, we did nothing to was coming and attacking us. For what? Because we were different than them? Because we had different beliefs and different ideas? To this day, it's still a mystery. It really is as to why the Taliban did what they did. But it has made us a stronger country because of it.